Last episode, we checked out the brief history of how Star Wars mobile games got started, and even saw all the games developed by THQ Wireless. Today, we'll be continuing that story with part 2 of looking back at THQ Wireless and Star Wars, with this time exploring all the Star Wars mobile games that THQ had published back when they still had the license. So join me on this mini-series as we take a trip back in time and check out all these games for ourselves on Silo's Star Wars Blast from the Past. Star Wars Battle Above Coruscant, developed by Universamo in July 2005, was a classic shoot-'em-up set in the opening battle of Episode 3. Players were able to play as either Anakin Skywalker or Obi-Wan Kenobi and pilot their Jedi starfighter against masses of droid ships, with General Grievous being the main boss. Battle Above Coruscant was a fantastic addition to the mobile game lineup at the time, and received mostly positive reviews. But its main downside was its short length, being only a total of 6 levels. Star Wars Puzzle Blaster, developed by Mint in 2005, it was a reskin of an already existing puzzle game series. So of course this followed the basic puzzler premise, where you needed to line up 3 like helmets to wipe them off the board. Once you cleared the entire screen, you moved on to the next round. There were 11 different type of helmets, from C-3PO to Darth Vader. And while a fun little distraction, the game got a lot of flack for being a Star Wars themed rendition of Snood. Star Wars Ask Yoda, released in 2005 and developed by Amplified Games. This title was based on the original 2D animated Clone Wars TV series. That came out before the 2008 3D and canon Clone Wars series. Ask Yoda was a rather simple game, where you basically asked Yoda questions and got magic 8-ball type of answers in return. Riveting stuff. Star Wars Lightsaber Combat, another 2005 release and developed by Top Gam. This was a 2D fighting game where the player played as Obi-Wan Kenobi and had to fight Darth Maul. While it had good animations and was nice to look at, the game was plagued of sluggish controls, a bare handful of moves, and very little content overall, making it a poor value for anyone willing to pay the game's premium price tag and actually buy it. Republic Commando Order 66, developed by Magellan. This was an overhead shooter released in 2005 and a non-canonical sequel video game of Star Wars Republic Commando, exclusively only available on mobile phones. The game had 5 levels, each with 3 sublevels and every level taking place on a different planet. Each level you would take control of a 3-man squad of clone commandos, as well as having the option of playing as Episode 2 Anakin for some reason. Star Wars Force Unleashed, developed by Universamo, the game was released on September 29, 2008, shortly after the console and handheld versions of the game. Unlike most Star Wars THQ mobile titles, this one came with a pretty steep price tag of $10 American. And what it made different from its console version counterparts is that the player could not directly control Starkiller's movements, rather only decide how he attacks the opponent. And with no load times and the ability to drop in and out pretty much on the whim, made this game a decent time killer with the Star Wars brand name stamped on it. Star Wars Trench Run, developed by Infrared 5 and released on November 17, 2009. This was an exclusive mobile title for the iPhone by THQ that let players pilot an X-Wing in the latest 3D mobile graphics during the Battle of Yavin. Unfortunately, the game only featured 30 minutes of gameplay, with the replay value only really being by playing the same levels over and over again in harder difficulty. And coming in with a $5 price tag meant that while the game looked pretty, it really wasn't worth the money for such condensed gameplay, with many players feeling cheated in the end by how short the game actually ended up being. Star Wars Jedi Mind Tricks, released in 2009 and developed by Universamo, was a match 3 mobile puzzle game that encompassed the entire Star Wars saga, including the Clone Wars TV series. The game was simple enough when looking at it at first glance, but its immense challenge in spotting where you're able to make essential combinations was what made this stand out from the rest of the puzzle games out at the time. Star Wars Battlefront Mobile Squadrons, developed by Mikoshi. This was the 4th installment of the Battlefront series and the first one released exclusively on mobile on April 2nd, 2009, by THQ. As you can imagine, mobile games in 2009 were limited on what they can accomplish, and Mobile Squadrons was no exception. It only had 5 heroes in Count Dooku, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and Mace Windu. Unlike the actual Battlefront series, Mobile Squadrons was also a shooter-on-rails type of game, yet the player still had the chance to choose to play as between the Republic, Confederacy, Rebellion, or Empire, and have their choice of 3 classes, which were Trooper, Sharpshooter, and Heavy Weapons Trooper. The game also featured a unique online component where the player could log on to THQ's website and view their own stats, along with the stats of their faction and other players. Star Wars: The Battle of Hoth, released on July 7, 2010, and developed by Fluffy Logic, was another of the new wave of exclusive Star Wars mobile titles for the iPhone and iPad. This itself was a standard and very basic tower defense game that had the player defending their base on Hoth as the Rebel Alliance against swarms of Imperial troops. The game, while having been sold on the marketplace for only $3, never really took off, due to the overwhelming complaints of the game simply being boring and below average. Star Wars Arcade Falcon Gunner, developed by Vertigor and released on November 18, 2010 for the iPhone and iPad Touch, along with the iPad 2 months later. That was an augmented reality shooter that sold for $3 American on the marketplace. The game allowed the player to point their iOS device camera towards anything to serve as the backdrop for an intense shootout with Imperial ships, as they manned the gunner turret on the Millennium Falcon. Star Wars Imperial Academy, released on December 8, 2010 and developed by NG Moko, was a freemium blaster for the iPhone based on the same engine NG Moko used in its other game, Eliminate Pro, a then innovative 2009 action game where 4 players dropped into lightning-fast shoot-'em-up arenas. The problem is that Imperial Academy didn't really do anything to improve on Eliminate Pro. All it did was just slap on Stormtrooper armor over it and added new ways to make money. Most notably, it even included an online multiplayer function, which honestly wasn't really much to write home about, as the games were just endless deathmatch rounds. And that itself was the last Star Wars mobile game ever published by THQ Wireless when Disney took over the IP in 2012. Throughout the years, whether developing the games or just publishing them, THQ Wireless were the true pioneers of Star Wars mobile gaming. They not only were open to telling original stories, but pushed for innovation and created demand for Star Wars on mobile. However, with that said, they also conducted numerous bad practices in game publishing, introduced pay-to-win elements, and focused far more on quantity over quality when it came to releasing games. But regardless, they did open up the doors for Star Wars games on an entirely different and new platform at the time, which now as a result has allowed us to play our favorite Star Wars mobile games that we do today. In the next episode of Silo Star Wars Blast from the Past, we'll continue exploring the history of Star Wars on mobile, except this time the game's developed by Disney itself. This is N7 from Silo, signing off.